Hello, I'm David Bowman, the tutoring coordinator for the BCSCR project of the Three Rivers Education Foundation. BCSCR is living up to its title, which is to build communities that support children's reading. And one of the fundamental ways that we do this is through our tutoring program, which means you, the tutors, are responsible for helping kids make amazing growth in their reading abilities. And before I say anything else, I just want to say thank you. I know that tutoring is tough. It requires a lot of planning, a lot of preparation, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. But I can assure you that what you're doing is working. It's truly helping kids make substantial improvements in their reading abilities, and for that, a very heartfelt thank you to each one of you. I would like to take a moment and show you some of the results that we found for the fall 2015 semester. And they're very exciting, as you'll see. So let's take a look first at what types of scores we're looking at. So we're only going to be looking at what we call valid scores. And by that we mean that the student received at least 24 hours of tutoring services, which includes the pre and post test time. The student also took the pre and post test and did not have any rush flags on the assessment. So when we look at these scores coming up, we're only looking at students who meet these particular criteria here. So what did we find? How well did these students do? Well, if we look at the reading gap at the pre-test and post-test, we see that kids made just about 1.2 grade levels improvement in their reading over about a 3.5 month period. So the way I look at it is this. I look at the gap, the difference between a student's reading ability and grade level. We call that a reading gap. I look at it at the pre-test and I look at it at the post-test. And if the gap is less at the post-test on average, then we call that a reading gain or a reading ability improvement. So when we show that the students had a 2.1 grade level gap at the beginning on average and on average had a 0.91, what that really means is that overall students made just about 1.2 grade level improvements in their reading ability as a direct result of the tutoring that you provided. And so when I say that you all are key to helping kids improve their reading and that tutoring is a fundamental strategy for helping kids advance their reading abilities, this is the evidence right here. A 1.2 rounded, a 1.2 grade level increase because of the work that you did week after week, day after day with these students. So thank you very much. Now, interestingly, so 2.1 grade level decrease or reading gap at the pre-test is pretty significant. Now this is looking at all the kids kindergarten through high school. If we look at just the third grade group as a comparison group, we're still looking at well over a full grade level gap at the pre-test. Now that gap tends to get larger over time, but overall 2.1 with an increase of 1.2 grade levels as a result of your tutoring. So what else did we find out about these students? Well, I took a look at the growth based on various categories. So we had about 18% of the kids who were originally below their grade level reading ability who moved to or above their grade level. Now, we would obviously like to see every kid meet grade level expectations, but considering how far behind the majority of these students are, just making substantial progress towards grade level is very, very acceptable. So we had about 94% of the kids made at least a half a year's gain. We had 37.4% who made 1 year's gain or greater. We have 30% who made 1.5 years gain or greater, and we even had just a little bit over 11% who made on average a 2 years improvement in their reading ability. These are great results. So I also looked at the amount of time compared to the amount of growth. So the valid scores is anybody with more than 24 hours of tutoring. But I wanted to know, is there a difference in the average achievement of kids who got the minimum, the 24, compared to those who got the full tutoring process, the full number of hours, 30 to 32 hours? And it turns out there really is a very large difference. So the group of kids who had 20 to 20, 24 to 26 hours made on average a 0.88 grade level gain. But we compare that to the kids who had the maximum number of hours, 30 to 32, and look how they did. They made an average improvement of 1.3 grade levels. That is a huge difference. As a matter of fact, we can run the numbers. So 1.37 minus 0.88, and what we find is that that difference in the two groups is about half of a grade level difference. That is a huge difference, and this is primarily the reason why, even though we'll accept scores that are as low as 24 hours, we really want to get every kid the maximum amount of service possible. It makes a huge difference in their overall reading achievement rates. So now we have to look at something else. So I've described to you what valid scores are, but within valid scores, we also took a look at those students whose tutoring programs most closely aligned with the BCSCR approach. So these are all the valid scores, but we have another subgroup which we call the compliant scores. And here's what that means. Compliant means, of course, it's a valid score, but it also means that the tutor regularly addressed all 6 components in reading, which means pretty much every week and a half, the tutor addressed every one of those 6 areas. Then compliant also means a standard schedule, which is about 2 hours per week every week. And finally, that the tutor designed and delivered the instructions. So this wouldn't include Lexia and SRA and all these different kinds of reading approaches. Now, those various approaches worked for some kids. There's no doubt about it. But that's not the BCSCR approach. So I wanted to separate out those that followed our approach most closely and those who did anything different than that. So when I talk about compliant scores, I'm talking about the students whose tutoring experiences matched these criteria right here. This does not mean good tutoring versus bad tutoring. It doesn't mean that students made gains or didn't make gains. It just means how closely did the tutoring environment comply with or align with the BCSCR approach. So we have to be very careful about what we read into the term compliant. It does not mean good or bad. It just means that the tutor was able to or was not able to follow the BCSCR approach, which are these criteria right here. Then I even looked at a third group, which I call compliant non-6, which means they did all of these things here, except did not regularly address the 6 components of reading. So we have 3 groups. We have all scores, all the valid scores. Then we have the compliant scores, which looks like this, and then we have the compliant non-6, which is compliant in every criteria, except not regularly addressing the 6 components of reading. So we have 3 groups. So let's see how well they did. What we find is that there is a huge difference in students' average growth. So for example, if I'm only looking at the average growth among the students whose tutoring experiences complied with the BCSCR approach, you see we've got on average a 1.3 grade level improvement in reading skills, which is much better than the 1.19 grade level of all valid scores. This subset, the compliant environment, greatly outperformed the general population of valid scores. But look at the third column over there, the third bar, valid non-compliant. So compliant in every way, but the tutor did not regularly address all 6 reading components. This group, on average, made a zero point 0.7 grade level improvement. So they did everything except that, right? So we can compare the valid compliant with their 1.38 grade level improvement against the valid non six components group. And what we see is there's a 0.68 grade level difference between those two populations of students. So the question we have to ask ourselves, we made such a big stink about regularly addressing the six components, how important it is to address every single one of those components every week or every couple of hours. Well, this is the reason why. Because we don't want kids to be stuck in that group that only made zero point 0.7. We want them to have the advantage of being in the population, the group that made the 1.38 grade level improvement. So when you think about your tutoring and you're thinking about what am I going to do with kids today? What am I going to do this week with kids? Always be thinking about the six components of reading, because the data are very clear that that single element right there is going to help students make the maximum amount of growth possible. Fortunately, it wasn't so many that were in that third group there. Most of them were in that first group, which is why we have a very nice average increase overall of 1.2 grade levels, or 1.19. And I tell you, I am very pleased with the results. I'm very pleased with the work. I looked at every single tutor's instructional reports and session logs for last semester. And overall, I am very satisfied. The service that you're providing is high quality, it's thoughtful, it's conscientious. I can't even say it. Conscientious, thank you. Um, and it looks like the tutors, for the great part, are really thinking about kids' needs and what they can do to help kids make the maximum growth possible. And I'm pleased, which means, again, I just want to say to each of you who are tutoring for BCSCR, thank you very, very much. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for taking a couple minutes to look at these data with me. And I'm looking forward to working with you throughout this next semester. Again, I'm David Bowman with BCSCR. Thank you and have a wonderful day.